What is the worst case of entitlement you have ever seen? Used to work at a call center doing tech support for Apple products, specifically iOS devices. Had a 19-year-old girl tell me she had cracked her fifth iPhone and needed a new one ASAP. I explained that she would need to either mail it in to us or take it to the nearest Apple store so we could replace it. She literally said, "Oh my fucking God, you expect me to go to the fucking store? Just get my phone fixed." Then I explained that if she didn't want to go to the store, she could mail it, and that if she went with the most expensive shipping options, we could get her new phone in 3 days. She thought I was fucking joking. The call lasted for another 20 minutes, because I think she actually did not understand that there was no way for her to get exactly what she wanted immediately. I quit the next week.
I can relate to that. I used to work in customer service, and people often don't get how things work. I had a caller who didn't understand that we couldn't rush requests. They wanted everything done instantly. The frustration builds up. Sometimes, you just realize it's not worth it. Quitting feels like the better option than dealing with constant misunderstandings. It's a whole different vibe once you're out.
Kid in high school slapped my sister. I grabbed him and was about to slap him back in front of his friends when he said, "Do you know who my father is? You aren't allowed to touch me." So I didn't slap him. I punched him in the stomach, then kneed him in the face. Then I held him up so my sister could slap him. None of his friends did anything. I found out later they all had wanted to hit him previously, but were actually afraid of his dad. And his dad did try to have me arrested, but the school cop told him that if he had me arrested, my parents could have his son arrested for slapping my sister. And while I would likely face no formal charges since I was coming to the aid of my sister, he would likely be charged with a series of crimes since he was about to turn 18 and she was 14.
That's an intense situation. It's interesting how the threat of someone's dad can change the dynamic. You stepped in for your sister, which is commendable. Funny how his friends didn't support him. They were all scared. The school cops seemed to handle it well too, pointing out the potential consequences for the dad. Sometimes, things like this just highlight how ridiculous some situations can get in high school.
When I was in the military, there was a private PV2 in my unit who told the first sergeant, "I'm not trying to pull rank or anything, first sergeant, but my mother is a major." He literally thought he could boss around a command team because his mother outranked them. He ended up getting chaptered. Edit, to answer questions, the first sergeant went appropriately ballistic. The soldier ended up in the front-leaning rest, that is doing push-ups, for an extended period of time and received a developmental counseling form. His mom also got a courtesy email to let her know what her son was up to. The soldier eventually received company and field grade Article 15s for other boneheaded things he did. Non-judicial punishment. The Army takes your rank, your personal time, and part of your pay, and ended up getting chaptered under Chapter 14-12B, i.e., they kicked him out for patterns of misconduct.
That's a wild story. It's funny how some people think they can leverage family connections to get special treatment. The kid clearly didn't understand how it worked. Getting put in the front-leaning rest must have been tough, but a good lesson. Sounds like he kept messing up too, which led to him getting kicked out. Kind of a rough way to learn about consequences and rank.
When I was 6, I had this friend who would come over all the time to hang out. I lived in a town of 200 people, and kids that were my age and wanted to hang out with me were scarce. So he would come over, and I had an Xbox and a Nintendo 64, which was pretty cool BTW, but anyway, he would come over and just play while I watched. This was pretty boring for me, so one day he came and I said I didn't want to play games, I wanted to go outside and do something. He got real mad and said if I didn't want to play games, we couldn't be friends anymore. I, already having developed the fuck you attitude, said fine. I guess he didn't expect that Kazi threw this hooja fit and started crying, and my mom had to call his mom to come get him. So yeah.
That sounds like a tough situation. It's wild how seriously kids take friendships. I had a similar friend who only wanted to play video games, and I was more into playing outside. One day, I just decided I didn't want to hang out anymore. It's funny looking back now, how those little things felt so big. Kids have their own ways of handling things, and sometimes it just doesn't click.
Was at a shopping center and came out ahead of my car and heard someone honking repeatedly. Curious, I went over to look and saw a car sitting in a lane, turned signal on, with 5+ cars behind them, going to town on the horn as someone sat in their car with the engine running in the closest parking space to the door, clearly content to sit there and ignore the person demanding they leave faster. I stood and watched for a minute, along with a gathering crowd, as the guy in the parked car just sat there. When I left, I could still hear the person in the turn signaling car still honking away.
That's a classic. I've seen similar situations before. One time, I was at a grocery store and this lady just parked in the middle of the aisle, talking on her phone. Cars were stuck behind her, honking. Instead of moving, she seemed completely unaware of the chaos. It was funny to watch everyone's reactions. Eventually, she noticed but just rolled her eyes and kept talking. People really can be inconsiderate sometimes.
I'm a flight attendant, and once a person had a heart attack during boarding. We started CPR and were trying to revive him with the AED when another passenger started yelling at us because he was going to miss his connecting flight. He told us that we should open the plane door and throw him out so we could take off on time, and multiple other passengers agreed with him.
That's a wild story. It's crazy how some people can be so self-absorbed in high-stress situations. While someone's life is on the line, all they can think about is their flight. It's a reminder of how priorities can really get skewed. I can't imagine trying to focus on saving someone while people are yelling about a missed connection. Just shows how some folks don't get the bigger picture.
I've probably seen worse cases, but this happened yesterday, so it's definitely fresh in my mind. I work at a car dealership, and I was writing down some information while a customer was on the phone with their insurance. They were back and forth on hold, talking to different people, trying to figure out why their rate would go up so much. I'm gonna try to finalize a few things. I guess she had to write something down that she was talking about. She takes the pen I'm using to write out of my hand, takes the notepad, rips the page I was writing on off, and throws it down next to her, then begins writing, talking into the phone like, yeah, how much am I right? I'm sitting there with my jaw literally on the floor. Normally I wouldn't say anything, but I made a little mention like, oh, if you needed a pen, I'd be more than happy to hand you one. And she looks up and goes, you are MY salesman. You are here to work for me. You can do what you want to do when I'm done here. Politely asked her to leave, told her to have a great day.
That's an interesting situation. Dealing with customers can be unpredictable. Some really don't get that you have your own tasks to handle. I remember having someone take my coffee cup once, thinking it was theirs. I just let it slide. But your response was solid. Drawing a line can be tough, especially when they're so focused on their own issues. At least you handled it calmly.
I was getting tutored at school, and this guy apparently was interested in me. After my tutoring session, he was asking if I had plans, and I thought he was just making small talk, so I just said that I was working and spending time with my boyfriend, nothing special. He scoffed, gave me an attitude, and he said that he was tired of girls like me. Tired of helping girls like me and getting nothing in return. I asked him to clarify himself by what he meant in return, and he told me that if he was going to tutor an attractive girl, then that girl should reciprocate by going out with him, etc. When I was challenging that, he got more and more irate and started spewing some awful sexist shit. I noped out of there so fast.
That sounds really frustrating. It's wild how some people think they can demand things just because they're helping out. You were clear about your situation, and it seems he couldn't handle that. His reaction says more about him than you. It's good that you left when you did. You don't need to deal with that kind of attitude, especially not from a tutor. Just stay focused on what matters to you.
Freshman roommate in college chucked a massive fit because after buying her a ton of presents, buying all her friends dinner, and going on an additional shopping spree, her mom wouldn't buy her a $450 purse. Her mother had agreed to purchase her one in the range of $250, but argued that she had flown in for daughter's birthday and was renting a hotel room on top of all the things she had already purchased for her, and she had coupons or some such for a purse in that price range. My roommate's response was to finally storm off in the store and then tell me and the rest of the friends she was with that her mother always does this, and that she couldn't find any purse that cheap that she wanted. Went on a rant about how her mother was probably buying all the good stuff for herself. This was fairly early in the school year. My roommate and I ended up having a lot of problems.
Sounds like your roommate had a rough time with her mom over a purse. It's wild how stressed people can get over things like that. You'd think after all her mom did, she'd be a bit more understanding. Instead, it just turned into her blaming her mom for everything. It's crazy how early on in college, you can see people's true colors, especially when they don't get what they want. Makes living together a bit tense too.
I work graveyard at a gym. I re-rack every night around 1. When people see me doing this, they almost always put the weights back where they belong. One night, I was re-racking, and this big dude came in and started using the heaviest dumbbells, 120 pounds, 115, 110s, etc. Instead of putting them back, he was just leaving them on the floor. Some of the regulars walked up and said, "Hey man, don't be an asshole. You see he's putting shit away. Just put them back." He said, "No, I will not do that. This is MY Gym. I pay a membership here. I'm paying for him to put shit away. If I wanted to re-rack my own weights, I would work out at home."
That happens sometimes in gyms. People forget basic gym etiquette. I guess this guy felt entitled because he pays for a membership. It's interesting how some folks think that being a customer means they can just slide by without contributing. The regulars standing up for you makes sense too. It's a tough spot when you're just trying to keep things tidy while someone else doesn't care about their surroundings.
I didn't see this, but it makes my blood boil anyway. A man passed out in my dad's laundromat, right inside the doorway. As my dad was trying to take care of him, another customer repeatedly shoved the door open against the unconscious man's body, even as my dad was telling him to stop, and then walked over the body to go do his laundry without batting an eye.
That's pretty messed up. I can't believe someone would be so inconsiderate. Your dad was just trying to help, and that guy just walked right over it like it didn't matter. It makes you think about how some people can be so detached from what's happening around them. It's frustrating to see a lack of empathy in situations like this, especially when someone clearly needs help.
I worked as a busboy at a seafood restaurant when I was younger. The issue with lobsters that people don't realize is that no chef can control how much black sludge gets inside it. The black substance is made of eggs that were resorbed when caught. Most lobsters don't have it, but when they do, it's perfectly normal and safe to eat it. Anyway, a woman happened to get a lobster with the substance in the tail and immediately flipped out about it. The manager was sent over to assure her it was normal and that there was nothing to be alarmed about when she interrupted her by screaming, "Do you know who I am? I am the editor of Time magazine." The manager paused, said, "Good for you, ma'am," and continued on about how the lobster was fine. I was 15 and was shocked by how snobby an adult could act, as well as confused as to why her being an editor of a known magazine meant she deserved more than other guests.
I remember working as a busboy at a seafood place. One night, a woman found some black sludge in her lobster tail. She freaked out, yelling about being the editor of Time magazine. The manager just calmly explained that it was normal. I was 15 at the time, and honestly, it blew my mind how entitled some people can be. Just because you have a title doesn't mean you're more important than anyone else.
My husband and I went and got flu shots at this pharmacy, and my husband fainted when he got his. The pharmacist was, obviously, concerned and helped me get him laid out on the floor while she called an ambulance. There were 2 other customers who kept trying to interrupt her on the phone with 911 to help them with their orders, while my husband was lying on the floor unconscious. WTF.
That's a wild situation. Your husband fainting is one thing, but those other customers just don't get it. It's like, really? Someone's down, and you're stuck on your order? At least the pharmacist was focused and acted fast. Hope your husband was okay in the end. People can be so oblivious.
I went to a pretty upper-class private high school, thanks to my mom working there. My senior year, I saw a girl go into a full-on screaming, tear-filled, ran at her father in the parking lot after he'd surprised her with a brand-new, fully loaded BMW. She had wanted a Mercedes and straight up would not accept the gift.
That's a wild scenario. Can't imagine getting a brand new BMW and being upset about it. It's kind of crazy how some people just have different expectations. Must have been awkward for her dad, trying to do something nice and getting that reaction instead. Shows how sometimes, being in that kind of environment can mess with your perspective on things.
A new Sonic drive opened up last month in our town. Not a lot happens here, so when it opened, there were cars backed up for no joke about a mile. Me and my husband went later at night the day after it opened, thinking it would be less crowded, but no. There were people outside directing traffic. It was so busy. We were at a stop and talking to one of the guys directing. He said that the day it opened, a lady was waiting in line spilling outside and was yelling at him that she could see an empty seat inside and demanded him to let her in so she could get her FING cheeseburger. He told her that someone else has waited for that seat and that she had to wait like everyone else, and she spat in his face. Then he said, "Oh ho ho, okay, now you're not getting in at all," and wakied everyone and told them what she looked like and not to let her into any entrance or drive-through.
That's wild. It's funny how people can lose their cool over food. I remember a time when my friend got upset at a cafe for a missed order. He started arguing, and it just escalated. The staff ended up giving him free coffee, but it wasn't worth the fuss. Sometimes waiting is the best option. I guess people forget to just chill for a minute, especially when food is involved.
One time I was at Nordstrom's and overheard people talking at the register. I turned around and apparently it was the assistant to Abby Lee Miller and some of the studio girl from Dance Moms. I don't think it was the ones always on TV. Anyway, she was complaining about a dress she wanted to return and exchange and made sure the employee knew how important this was because she was going to the Kids' Choice Awards. I actually laughed to myself. And the only reason I knew who they were was because she pointed it out several times. I would have had no idea who they were. She was a brat, and I wasn't impressed by them.
That sounds like a typical moment where you realize not everyone is as cool as they think they are. You spot someone who's supposed to be famous, and they're just making a scene over something minor. It's funny how people in those environments act, like they're the center of the universe. Makes you appreciate those who don't need to announce their importance. It's a bit of a reality check on fame, I guess.
Nice guy's happy face, TM, can't believe that people think that if they're chivalrous and kind enough to a person, that they then deserve to leave the friend zone and start getting sex. Everyone should be a nice person, and of course you want kindness in a partner, but no one owes you anything for being a decent human.
I've seen this with a friend. He used to think that just being nice to girls meant he'd get a relationship. He never understood that kindness doesn't equal a guarantee. After a while, he started to get it. A good friendship is valuable, and being genuine is the way to go. It's probably the healthiest approach. Just being yourself is enough. No need to keep score or expect something back.
Worked as escalations manager for insurance. We changed our policies after people were screwing the system. They join, serve the grace period, claim $10,000 to $20,000, and then drop the cover. We closed the loophole, and the number of people who called up and flipped their shit was disgusting. When I call people out on their plan to screw the system, they get real quiet and they tone it down. Until then, however, goddamn, people act like they're 12.
Working as an escalations manager in insurance sounds rough. It's crazy how some people game the system just to get a quick payout. I guess when you call them out, they realize they can't act all big. It's a wild mix of frustration and entitlement. People really don't think about the consequences sometimes. It's like a reality check for them when the truth hits. Just another day dealing with some pretty childish behavior.
Spent a brief time sharing a house with a friend. In quotes, because we were no longer friends. My parents had a Wii and we fit they rarely used. I figured I'd bring it over. We went 50-50 on another couple controllers, so we had 4 and fun was had. A little while later, my parents were having a gathering, so I returned the Wii to them. My friend, the next day, sent me a very nasty email at work demanding that I return her Wii and we fit, and that I was horribly wrong for touching her stuff. Oh, yeah.
That's a pretty wild situation. It's strange how people can turn so quickly. You share something fun, and then it becomes this big deal. I mean, it was just a Wii. You brought it in to share some good times. It's not like you took her stuff for good. Some people just don't get the whole sharing concept. It's better to cut ties with someone like that anyway.
Working a shift at a supermarket years ago, I was talking to a friendly customer when a middle-aged woman stormed up to me and loudly demanded, "While you're talking nonchalantly to your friend, I could use some help over here." So I walked over to the shelf where she needed help. She had a basket in one hand and the other hand on her hip. So I asked, "What can I help you with?" She then pointed to a product at her arm level on the shelf and said, "I need one of these." So I picked it up and with a baffled expression on my face, just handed it to her. She angrily snatched the product from my hand, then stormed off, all the while looking at me, as though I told her I rubbed my balls on her daughter's chin that morning. A manager came up to me and said they had a complaint that I was rude to someone, etc., etc. I explained what happened. Then they told me that they had to take this seriously because she was the secretary of a senior person at the head office of the supermarket I worked at. Needless to say, I told them what an absolute cockwomble she was being, and they just let it be.
That sounds like a tough situation. I can picture it well. You're just trying to do your job, and then someone comes in hot like that. It's crazy how a simple interaction can escalate. I guess the manager had to take it seriously, but it's good they understood your side. People can be unreasonable sometimes, especially when they're having a bad day. At least you weren't in the wrong.
My family was out to dinner at our neighborhood restaurant, and a waitress came over and told us someone had run into our car. My dad ran out of the restaurant to find Myron Goldfinger, a supposedly famous architect, staggering drunkenly out of his vehicle, having smashed it into our Jeep. My dad went up to him and said, "You just crashed into our Jeep. I need your name and number to pay for the damage." The guy looked at him and said, "Don't you know who I am?" and started to stagger away. My dad said, "Excuse me, I think you've mistaken me for someone who gives a fuck. You crashed into my car." The guy said, "We're staying at the hotel down the street. You can ask the front desk for some money tomorrow."
So my family is eating out, and the waitress comes over saying someone hit our car. My dad goes outside and finds this Myron Goldfinger guy, an architect, totally out of it. He tries to brush it off, acting all important. My dad doesn't care though and tells him to pony up his info. The guy just wanders away, thinking he's above it all. Typical, right?
At work last Friday, a woman screamed at me about how she was never shopping here again because the lane she wanted to check out was closed. There were 10 other lanes open, many of them with no customers. I'm not even a cashier, I'm just a bagger, and at the time I was pulling carts. And the store closes next Saturday anyway.
It's funny how people react sometimes. You'd think with so many lanes open, they'd find another. But no, they focus on that one closed lane. I remember a time when someone yelled at me over a parking spot. It's just a bit ridiculous. I mean, we're all human, right? The place is closing soon anyway, so why stress? Just let it go and enjoy the last days there.
Our smoke alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. and we called the fire department. They were searching the house for flames when the neighbor next door complained to us that she was going to be late for work because the fire truck was blocking our joint drive. I mean, there were literally guys in heavy gear running in and out of the house. She was a high-paid techie marketer, too, not some struggling clerk.
It's kind of surprising how people can focus on their own problems, even in a crisis. The fire department is there, dealing with a potential emergency, but she's worried about being late for work. It's a good reminder that priorities can be pretty skewed. It's just one of those moments that highlights different attitudes toward urgency and what really matters in life.
A friend whining that his parents obviously didn't care about him because they gave him an older model car for free in a color he disliked. Another friend of mine getting job interviews because his father, who is moderately famous in upper-level management at a game company, arraigned them for him. The friend would later complain that he's so unlucky, disregarding the fact that getting an interview in the first place is lucky as shit, and how he could never work a retail job ever again. Cue him being unemployed for 5 years, can't drive because it makes him cry out of fear, but somehow thinks he deserves better.
It's funny how some people see things. Like that friend with the car. Free ride, but all he sees is the color. Then there's the other guy, getting interviews handed to him because of his dad. He complains about luck but ignores the privilege he's sitting on. Meanwhile, he's been unemployed for years because he can't face retail. It's wild how entitlement can blind someone to their own opportunities.
A little late to the party, but I have a mild entitlement story. In 2001, I went to Italy. We spent one of the days in Florence, and of course, we went to the Accademia Gallery. They have signs posted and tour guides stressed several times that no pictures could be taken of David. While I was waiting for the rest of my group to finish, I stepped outside to smoke. A big black van pulled up in front of the museum, and Arnold Schwarzenegger got out and went in. I quickly stubbed out the cig and followed him back inside. The first thing he did was go straight to the statue of David and started taking pictures. Of course, no one said anything to him. I actually snapped a picture of him taking a picture. No signs were posted about not taking pics of entitled jackass governors. By the way, he's short.
That's an interesting encounter. It's funny how rules seem to change for certain people. You'd expect someone like Schwarzenegger to follow the guidelines, but it's all about that celebrity privilege. I guess it's not just about being famous, it's about the confidence to ignore the rules. And yeah, seeing him up close must have been a surprise, especially if he didn't match the larger-than-life persona. People really can be surprising.
I went to a pretty big football school in college, and my last year, I lived really close to the school and walked to every game. My house was about half a mile from the stadium. The amount of people thinking it's okay to park in my front yard without asking me was astonishing. My downstairs neighbor, the basement of the house was converted into 2 apartments, had a parking spot in a driveway BTW, and some random dude tried to park there. I asked him if he knew me neighbor. He was a weird guy with no connection to the school. The guy said no, and basically that he was able to park there if he wanted. I was like, nope, you'll get towed if he comes back and your truck is parked in his space. The guy tried to argue with me about it, but I was like, whatever, just a warning. You'll get towed if he comes back before you do. The guy was miffed but left. TLDR, you aren't entitled to park in other people's driveways/lawns.
That's a classic college move. People just think they can park anywhere, especially near schools. It's wild how they don't consider asking first. I had a similar situation once where someone parked in my friend's driveway during a party. It created tension, and we had to ask them to move. Some folks just don't get it. Respecting other people's space should be basic common sense, but not everyone gets that.
One of my dad's co-workers is perhaps old economy Steve incarnate. Claims because he pulled himself up by his bootstraps, he deserves the world handed to him on a silver platter. Dad's boss even said, "You got the job because you knew people in here," and he still believed he pulled himself up by his bootstraps.
It's interesting how some people see their success as purely their doing, ignoring the help they got along the way. That coworker seems to be living in his own narrative. It's like he can't accept the reality that connections matter in the workplace. Sometimes, it feels like a denial of the role that luck and timing play. Just goes to show that perspective can really shape how someone views their life and achievements.
Working in IT in a call center environment. We were strictly in-house. Had someone assistant call me asking for a password reset for end user. Advised I need to speak with end user directly, as we cannot give passwords out for anyone to anyone. Their response, "It's too bad you're refusing to help them because they make more money than both of us combined." I told them I try and treat everyone equally regardless of income. Best part, I looked the guy up. He wasn't even an exec or VIP user.
It's interesting how some people think income gives them certain privileges. I've had similar situations where someone assumed they were special just because of their job title or salary. I usually end up sticking to the rules too. It's just about expertise and trust. In the end, it's all about doing the right thing, no matter who's asking. It's funny when you find out they're not even who they claim to be.
I just posted this in another thread, but once again my roommate in freshman year of college. She was a good roomie and all, don't get me wrong, but she was spoiled absolutely rotten. She had season passes to all the home games, but she demanded to go to the away games as well. One of the away games took place in Arizona, school was in Kansas, and when her mom refused to buy her plane/game tickets, she exploded. Wailing, snot running down her face, refusing to go to class, you name it. Her friend who lived nearby had to come and calm her down. She gave me a "this happens all the time" look as she did.
That sounds like a wild situation. It's crazy how some people react when they don't get their way. Your roommate must have been used to getting everything she wanted. I guess having a friend who understands those meltdowns is necessary in college. It's kind of funny looking back at it now, but I can imagine it was a bit much to deal with at the time.
I was lifeguarding for one of my kids' Cub Scout events. I'm a nanny. That was held at my kid's house, but with so many kids around, the scout leaders wanted an adult who had guarding experience and who wouldn't be distracted by other kids / stuff going on. Most of the kids were very well behaved and listened, except this one little shit. At any given moment, there were probably 20 kids in the pool, and it's not all that big. It's a standard backyard size pool, so they were not allowed to dive, flip, or roughhouse. Also no big floaties, because someone could have easily gotten stuck under one. After like the 30th time of me yelling at this kid for being a dick, he looks at me and says, "I don't really have to follow the rules, I'm already a Boy Scout, and they are Cub Scouts." He then pulled a lounge floatie into the pool, pushing some little kids underwater in the process. My 3 kids were standing next to me at the moment, and just went slack-jawed like WTF. I then put him in timeout for 5 minuets, which was wonderful, because he looked defeated AF.
So, I was lifeguarding for my kids' Cub Scout event. Most kids were fine, but there was this one who just wouldn't listen. He kept breaking the rules, thinking his scout status gave him a pass. After I repeatedly told him to stop, he decided to pull a floatie into the pool, causing chaos. My kids looked stunned. I ended up giving him a timeout, and it was kind of satisfying seeing him look defeated.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.